Thank you very much. I'm Chris Vallotton. I'm the author of the book Basic Training for the Prophetic Ministry, and I want to welcome you to session number 2. And today, this session, we want to talk about the difference between prophets and prophecy. So 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Let's talk about that first. Paul writes this, "Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware. You know when you were pagans, you were led astray by mute idols, however you were led. Therefore I make known to you that no one speaking by the Spirit of God says Jesus is accursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. There are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are a variety of ministries, but the same Lord. There are a variety of effects, but the same God who works all things in all persons." Everybody say, works all things in all persons. We're going to talk more about this in just a second, but I want you to notice something, that Paul is making a distinction here. The word gifts, now concerning spiritual gifts, the word gifts is not in the original text. It was added later. It actually reads like this, "Now concerning the spiritual, brethren, I don't want you to be unaware." Because Paul actually isn't talking about the gifts of the Spirit primarily. His primary emphasis is to talk to the Corinthians who were Greek mythologists. They came out of Greek mythology. You understand Greek mythology had many gods. So they had a god of the sun, god of the moon, god of fertility. They had a god of love. They had all these different gods, a god of war. And so these people, these Corinthians, came to Jesus at a time when they wouldn't have known about Adam and Eve. They wouldn't have known about the book of Genesis. They wouldn't have known what was called the Torah. They wouldn't have known anything about the Bible. They would have known about Greek mythology. Like they would have known about Hercules and all these different gods that we now sometimes see on the movie screens. And so when Paul speaks to them, it's interesting how he's talking to a group of people who have the right experience. They're experiencing the Holy Spirit. Probably the book of Corinthians was written to probably the most spiritual group of people. Only problem is this: they had the right experience, but the wrong theology. So Paul writes to them and says, "Now concerning the spiritual, I don't want you to be unaware." And then he talks about the fact, he says, "You know, when you were pagans, you were led astray by mute idols." He says, "No one speaking by the Spirit of God can say Jesus is cursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit." Now, if you read those verses and you don't understand the context, you're like, I could get an unbeliever to say Jesus is Lord. He doesn't have the Holy Spirit. Or, in other words, that doesn't seem to make sense to us. Except for he's talking to polytheists, people who were formerly polytheists. And he says this, he goes on to say, "There are a variety of gifts with the same Spirit, a variety of ministries but the same Lord, a variety of effects but the same God who works all things in all persons." And then he goes on to name different gifts of the Spirit. He says there's the gift of wisdom, but the same Spirit. There's the gift of prophecy, but the same Spirit. The gift of miracles, but the same Spirit. And the key operative word here is the word same. Now, why is he saying that to them? Because these Corinthians don't understand how the spirit world works. They've come out of a false spiritual world of demons, where every manifestation has a different God. And he's saying, listen, our God is one God. There's only one God, there's only one Lord, there's only one Christ. There's many different gifts, and here, let me name 9 of them. So he lists 9 gifts of the Spirit. And his point is, there's many different gifts, but there's only one Holy Spirit who works all things in all people. So I think that the first thing we need to realize is that Paul talks about the gifts of the Spirit in 1 Corinthians 12 to illustrate the spirit realm, which tells me 2 things. First of all, I'm not sure there's only 9 gifts of the Spirit. If you believe there's only 9, it doesn't trouble me. I'm saying Paul's initial content was not, let me teach you about the gifts of the Spirit. His subject is, let me teach you Corinthians who came out of Greek mythology about how the spirit world actually operates. There's only one Holy Spirit. And therefore, you can have all these gifts that you guys are experiencing, you Corinthians, you're experiencing these 9 gifts. Yes, but they are not 9 different spirits. They are not 9 different gods. There's only one Lord. There's only one God.